They're part of Pickett's division, but they're just not here at Gettysburg. So, Longstreet, of course, has familiarity with George Pickett. George Pickett served. He was a West Point graduate, 1846, I believe, was his class, finished last. But like I tell people, there's always going to be somebody finishing last, and he finished. How many people started and did not finish? He finished. Custer did the same thing. He finished. Just because you finish last, that's not a derogatory label. We make it so, but it's not in reality.
Does that go for your marathon?
I don't care what they think about me as long as I'm upright. What's funny is I come across, I'm moving like this across the finish line, and there's a Marine lieutenant there, and he's looking, and I perk up at that point. Everyone all the way, sir. I'm like I'm an idiot. I'll get back to this. Slowly get lower. I remember the first one I ran 12 years ago, right by the Iwo Jima Memorial. I come up, and there's this nice plot of grass, and I sit down. This Marine sergeant, excuse me, sir, but you can't sit there. I said, you're going to have to help me up. I'm not going to make it. So, but Longstreet has familiarity with Pickett during the Mexican-American War. They're at Chapultepec together, and Pickett, I think Pickett is operating at a level above his abilities. He's more of a brigade commander, but he makes his way up to division command. He stays under Longstreet because Longstreet's going to look after him. Longstreet probably knows he has to look after this guy because he's flamboyant. He probably likes to joke. He's not as serious as Lee. Lee's not a big fan of Pickett. But Longstreet is because of their service during the Mexican-American War. And I feel bad for Pickett. Division's coming up here. They're bringing up the rear. They get here before they can take part in the day 2 action, and they're relegated to day 3, and that's the big hurrah. It's interesting to me too, the way this battle plays out. We have day 1, we have big day 2, and then we have Pickett's charge on day 3. It's not the only thing, but it's the most well-known thing. And if it doesn't flow like that, will we ever have a movie? Think about Chancellorsville. What's the big thing at Chancellorsville? Jackson's flank march. It comes at the beginning. You got to have the big denouement at the end. It's the only French word I really know, other than French fry and stuff. But Pickett's charge is this big event. It comes at the end. That's when you want your big moment in a movie. So it's the movie week. When I watch the movie, it's a journey. I'm just trying to get to the end because that's the best part. It's not my favorite journey movie, but you know, The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly is a journey too. But I love that journey all the way. That's my favorite movie, getting all the way to where Tuco's running around that graveyard and you're playing Ecstasy of Gold. It wakes me up every morning. But you have this big event at the end, and that facilitates this being this fascinating story. You've got this mythical charge going across these open fields. We'll talk about what the men thought about going across the open fields when we get on the other side. But Pickett's men are bringing up the rear. Excuse me if I'm talking a lot. This is my last shot with y'all this year, so I'm going to get it out while I can. My girlfriend doesn't want to hear it. She did tell me last night, I was happy. She said, you know, you haven't been as grouchy this week before before your tours. You usually are. I said, sister, the week ain't over yet. About 10 more minutes, I can roll right into it. So, you know, wait till I get up tomorrow morning. So Pickett's division is coming up, bringing up the rear. They're in Chambersburg on June 27th. And what are they doing? They're tearing up railroad tracks. Part of Lee's army is headed out towards Carlisle, living off the land, gathering up supplies. Another part of his army has come through Gettysburg on June 26th, headed out towards York and then Wrightsville, gathering up supplies, living off the land. Pickett's men are tearing up railroad tracks. That's like extra duty if you're a soldier. And that's the worst. You don't want to be doing that extra duty. They depart Chambersburg approximately 2 a.m. on July 2nd, making their way here. They approach the battlefield as the July 2nd attacks are getting ready to be launched. They're told, we don't need you, just hang out and be ready for the tomorrow morning, July 3rd. They're going to camp along Marsh Creek, and they're going to get up about 3 o'clock in the morning on July 3rd, eat, and start moving this way. They're going to get into this area sometime around 9 o'clock. Some soldiers write it was 11 o'clock. I think that's too late, so the times always vary when you read about these things. Probably about 9 o'clock. There's the horse tour. And they're making their way through the cars, so very good. So that's where Pickett's men are at. Now, like I said, I feel bad for Pickett. He lives until 1875. If I want to get this out before I get to the end and forget about it. But you know, we had Fort Bragg, Fort Benning, Fort Hood, Fort Lee. They're not called that anymore. Fort Bragg is Fort Liberty Mutual now. But what does Pickett get? He gets Camp Pickett down in Virginia. It's not even a fort. It became a fort probably about 25 years ago, but it didn't last. He only got to enjoy his fort for about 25 years, and that's something else that I can't remember. I bring that up because I jumped into Camp Pickett once. We did an exercise. We came up from Bragg, jumped in there, and I swear I thought I was going to die. It was the hardest jump I ever had. I landed on an overgrown runway that was there, and I thought my back was broke.
Ouch.
And since I was the gun chief, so I'm telling my privates, go get the gun. I'm just laying there because I think I'm dying. I swear it made me shorter about a quarter of an inch. So Pickett just, this is it. And there's a famous story after the war. I think Lee is somewhere trying to raise funds for the college in the late 1860s. They're a hotel. Mosby's with Pickett. He takes Pickett to see Lee. Before they go, Pickett goes in to see Lee. Pickett tells Mosby, that man destroyed my division. Well, I think when he's coming out, he says, that man destroyed my division. And Mosby says, that man made you immortal. And that's true, because he's not that good of a division commander. Without this charge, we're not talking about Pickett. Most people that come here to the battlefield that know absolutely nothing, they've at least heard of Pickett's charge. It's the most famous charge in American history, I would think. So, enough about Pickett. I told you about Kemper. Any questions? Yes, sir.
Regarding Lee's order to go proceed on foot, not on horseback, I've read that Pickett advanced as far as the Cadore farm. Would that also been in violation of Lee's order?
By the letter, yes. But Pickett's where he's supposed to be, and he's going to be on horse service. I don't think that's a big deal with Lee. You know, he wants the men to be with their men, lead their men, and if you got to be on a horse to do it, be on a horse. So, but he knows it's going across open ground because Lee's riding around out there all morning, scoping things out.
And they'd be in range of little round stops too, wouldn't they?
They are. Or Kemper's flank is, yeah. Yep.
Yeah, is Garnett from the Deep South? Some of
He's
these guys
from
married.
Virginia.
What's that?
He's a Virginian.
Okay.
So yeah, he is from Virginia, which plays into the mystique of all these Virginians going across. Any other questions? All right. So what is Lee's plan for July 3rd? This is from the OR that was published January 20th, 1864. The result of this day meaning July 2nd, the result of this day's operation induced the belief that with proper concert of action and with the increased support of the positions gained on the right would enable the artillery to render the assaulting columns, we should ultimately succeed, and it was accordingly determined to continue the attack. The general plan was unchanged. What that means is Lee's initial plan for July 3rd is to resume the attacks on the end, use the artillery that has gained the Peach Orchard, and part of Johnson's division on Lower Culp's Hill, use that foothold and renew those attacks. Let's see. General Longstreet's dispositions were not completed as early as was expected, but before notice could be sent to General Ewell, General Johnson had already become engaged, and it was too late to recall him. This is a bit disingenuous of Lee. It's not that Johnson's men were engaged, they were attacked. The Union Army attacks over on Lower Culp's Hill. So Johnson didn't have anything to do with it. He's there and his men get attacked. That's how they become engaged. Unlike the previous evening where Longstreet met with Lee after the day's events are done to figure out what we're going to do in the morning, on July 2nd, after the action's finished, Longstreet does not go meet with Lee. And he just He's sort of brooding, I guess. He's probably upset. He lost a lot of men over here, so I can understand why. I think it's Lee's responsibility. If you want to talk to him and get things straight, you need to call him to you. And people complain about Meade having all these councils of war. Councils of war never fight. That's the old motto. But at least he was in communication with all his corps commanders pretty effectively, unlike, except for one particular guy who lost his leg. So that paragraph's a little disingenuous. And I think people after the war, they're looking for somebody to blame. Of course they're not going to blame Lee. And they take information like this that Lee puts in his official report to say Longstreet was supposed to have been ready at daybreak to attack, and he wasn't ready. It says General Longstreet was delayed by a force occupying the high rocky hills on the enemy's extreme left. That's the little round top area, from which his troops could be attacked in reverse as they advanced. His operations had been embarrassed the day previous by the same cause, and he now deemed it necessary to defend his flank and rear with the divisions of Hood and McLaws. He was therefore reinforced by Heath's division of two brigades of Penders, to the command of which Major General Trimble was assigned. General Hill was directed to hold his line with the rest of his command, afford Longstreet further assistance if required, and avail himself of any success that might be gained. A careful examination was made of the ground secured by Longstreet and his batteries placed in position, which it was believed would enable them to silence those of the enemy. Hill's artillery and a part of Ewell's was ordered to open simultaneously, and the assaulting column to advance under cover of the combined fire of the three. The batteries were directed to be pushed forward as the infantry progressed, protect their flanks, and support their attacks closely. We know that doesn't happen because the guns that they're going to use for that, Pendleton takes them away, they run out of ammunition, and really no artillery goes forward. So Lee's plan, what he's thinking afterward, what the plan was, doesn't happen. Any questions before we start walking? This is a walking tour, not a stand by the Florida.
One quick question. So I know William Pendleton's the guy that first accused Longstreet of not attacking in the early morning of the second day. Do you think Pendleton's an old man? I think when he gives that speech at Lee in Washington that he's just an old man that conflates the second day with the third day, and that's what starts the whole, like, Longstreet should have attacked early on the second, which we all know is false. But does that make any sense? I think he's conflating the two.
He's given the speech at Washington College. There's no way he's going to criticize Lee. And they're looking for somebody to blame. Like Harry Heath. I always say Henry. Harry Heath. What does Harry Heath say the battle started over? Shoes. Why does he say that, in my opinion? He says that because his men start this battle that Lee said he didn't want, and they lose this battle. Why did you start this thing that we lost? Shoes. We were looking for shoes. He needs an excuse. Pendleton is the guy that takes away the supporting artillery and moves them further back. So he plays a part in the overall defeat. When you're part of the problem, what do? You deflect. And I think that he is an old man. He's an old preacher. He's got no business in charge of the artillery. But Lee is a kind man, and he keeps this guy around for some reason. They don't really give him any operation control, except for when it comes to withdrawing artillery at a bad moment. So I think it's a little bit of all that, if that makes sense. Scapegoating, you can't put it on Lee. I always put it on Lee. I love Lee. I think he's a great guy, despite what ex-generals think of him. Smug, but he's the guy that ultimately responsibility for this lawsuit. So it is what it is. Question? Yes, sir.
Is the artillery in the peach orchard also supposed to go forward, or is it kind of stuck there?
I think they're hampered because there's artillery up on Little Round Top that's going to fire them. I think it's more towards the middle. And if you notice in that thing, he's telling Hill, at least in the OR, he told Hill to avail himself of any opportunities. In other words, Hill has the leeway to send some of his brigades forward then to take advantage of any breakthroughs. But Hill doesn't. Hill gets here and he doesn't move for 3 days, let's face it. So that doesn't happen either. But I think that artillery in the Peach Orchard is going to be stationary there because what is over on their right. And by now the 6th Corps is directly in their front too. They've arrived on the field. So you got a lot of infantry over there too. And McGilvery's gun line is directly in front of them. So.
Now, can they see that the Peach Orchard artillery? Because the most of the infantry doesn't know about McGilvery, right?
The infantry back here doesn't know about McGilvery because what we're going to see, the landscape, you're right, they can't even see the road. From the Peach Orchard, you probably can see McGilvery's line over there. And Alexander moves his gun forward on the second day during the fight. That's when they do move forward. McGilvery's line is over there firing then, so he knows they're there.
Yeah.
So because of what happened the next day. It's interesting to go back and read Alexander's account of when he's putting together the gun line. He's going from the Peach Orchard and moving north, and he writes out there that he's going out there, he's putting all this in place in the early morning, and when the sun finally rises, he's amazed at how much out in the open he is. He doesn't realize that he's out in the open, just everybody can see him at that point. The Union Army just lets him set up. They're going to wait and see what happens, so they don't mess with him, but he's just amazed. I can't believe I'm way out here in the wide open, everybody can see me, and nobody does anything. So, very interesting reading. Alexander's one of the better writers because he's, for the most part, objective. He's not trying to make excuses like these other two guys or anything. He's just writing, this is what happened, is the best I can recollect, and that's it. Take what you want. All right, questions? All right, like I said, we're going to go down here, walk up to the Spangler farm. We're going to go past the house and the barn, hang a left. Now, I know everybody out here doesn't want to become a licensed battlefield guide. That's great. They're not going to let all y'all become guides anyway. Just the fact of the matter. There's a cutoff there. When I took the test, like 150 people tried. 13 of us made it 8 years ago. So I know some people are out here, they like to see old friends, be part of this community, and that's fine. But once we come out of the woods, just look around. We're up by the barn and the house. Look around and see what you can see and what you cannot see. Because this place, this terrain we're going across, out of all the 3 days, to me, if you're reading about it, it doesn't do it justice until you see it. Even more so than standing on Little Round Top. It's a high hill and you can see a lot. We've been on other hills. But you're down here in this swale, you can't even see the road, much less Cemetery Ridge. And that's where these men, we're going to get to where these men actually line up today. And you go back and read about this, now you can visualize it. So take the time amongst your conversations to look around and see what you can see, again, what you cannot see, and think about these soldiers that lined up about 9 o'clock in the morning on July 3rd, and their commanders know what's out there in front of them, but they don't necessarily know. They just know what's going to be important. All right? All right. It's kind of windy today, so I don't know which way the wind is going to blow my voice, but if you have a hard time hearing me, please let me know. I'll do my best to speak up louder than I'm already speaking. This is the area of where Garnett's men line up to begin this assault. Armistead's brigade is back closer to the tree line, and that goes down to another swale. And then Kemper's line is over here. I know Leno's maps have Garnett here, Kemper's brigade on the other side of the lane. If you look at the Hessler-Mott book, I think Kemper's brigade comes farther this way. So it's close enough. We know this is the area, though, of Garnett's brigade. And lined up from my left to right, your right to left, would be the 8th Virginia, 18th Virginia, 19th Virginia, 28th Virginia, and then 56th Virginia on the end. So they go in numerical order as far as small number to big number. Makes it easier to memorize. I'm not very good at memorizing all these regiments. Sometimes I try, sometimes I don't. It depends on what I'm doing. But if you look this way, there's the Klingel house there to our right front. That is Big Round Top over there, the top of that hill. You cannot see Little Round Top. There's the signal station we know on Little Round Top, and it's still there. Even if the guy's climbing up on that rock that you're not allowed to climb on anymore, he can't see down in here. So Pickett's men are masked from the Union line over there. Unlike Pettigrew and Trimble's men further up there, they're in the tree line, but that's wide open. The ground doesn't undulate going west to east like it does in this area. You can't see the road until in this area. That car just went by, but to our direct front, you cannot see the Emmitsburg Road. You cannot see the ridge. If we can't see them, they can't see us. Out in front of us, though, would be that artillery. That artillery, when they open up the bombardment a little after 1 o'clock, they're firing at the ridge over there. As long as the Union Army's firing this way, some of those rounds are going to come over that ridge and land back here. And that's how these brigades sustain damage before this even starts. To get some context, Cemetery Hill is over there. Can everybody see the top of the blue water tower? That's East Cemetery Hill. It's across the Baltimore Pike. This is one of my rare originals, but that's the largest monument on the field. It has 2 flank markers on either side of the 107th Ohio, and in that monument is in the middle of it. It happens to be a water tower. There's no other monument for the 107th Ohio. So if you hear Tim Smith or somebody say, you know, hey, that's the 107th monument, like he does with the bottom of the hill, it's supposed to be Spangler Hill. Now this is the Lewis Trott original. Nobody's ever said this. I don't have many, but I hold on to the few I have. My point is, though, you can't really see up there. So like I said, Pickett's men are going to arrive in this area about 9 o'clock. Garnett, Kemper, and then Armistead is back there. And then there's a gap. And then the other 2 divisions are to the north over here. So, this comes from Confederate Veteran, 1930. It's entitled Road with Pickett. Captain P.J. White of Richmond, Virginia sends this letter from his old major, Edmund Berkeley of the 8th Virginia Regiment, Garnetts Brigade, Pickett's Division. He writes, and this is a little about the personality of Garnett. You really don't hear a lot about Garnett. If somebody dies, they never write about themselves, of course. So you hear less about those men that died, you know, midway early in the war versus the ones that lived longer. But this is a little bit about his personality. He writes, I receive yours with much pleasure, informing me that Lee Camp was going to secure a portrait of my dear old friend, the magnanimous General Richard Garnett, the only general on either side who rests in an unidentified grave. My brothers and myself were perhaps on more perfect terms of intimacy with General Garnett than any other officers in the Army, and my youngest brother served for a time on his staff. I buried on the Gettysburg battlefield, before going into the charge, an old deck of cards that my general, Colonel Hutton, and my brothers and myself had played probably more than 100 games while we were near Fredericksburg. And that's a funny thing about the war. Card playing and dancing and music are sins back then. So if you think you're going to die out here, you got to repent for your sins. Part of that, you got to bury your playing cards and put away that sin. Now, if you survive this and get back to camp and you're bored, what are you going to do? You're going to find another deck of cards and start playing before you bury them before the next charge. So they bury theirs here at Gettysburg before they commence in this charge. General Garnett's staff gave a supper, and this is in Fredericksburg, to which none were invited except General Garnett, Colonel Hutton, my brothers and myself, and believing General Lee had gone uptown, we were very hilarious, and General Garnett, being called on for a story and a song, gave a song called The Fog and the Dew, and a story called Mary Ann. I, being called for a song, gave Rum Tum Ta, Tucci Fa La. Sounds like he needs to repent to that. General Garnett seemed perfectly enthused and beat time to it with his knife on the table, and at its conclusion said to me, Major, my dear fellow, don't you know that's the first time I've heard that song since I left West Point. There were many other interesting occurrences in which we participated, and none more magnanimous man or one with a kinder heart fought the war. The morning after our supper at Fredericksburg, General Lee said to Peyton and Baldwin, you had a very lively crowd in your tent last night. And when I heard of his hearing us, I was awfully afraid he might have heard some of the words to my song. He's afraid he's going to offend Lee. What's interesting about that, not only that story, But this fellow, he writes, my brothers were near General Garnett when Pickett came up and spoke to him before we went into the charge. He said, Dick, old fella, I have no orders to give you, but I advise you to get across those fields as quick as you can, for in my opinion, you are going to catch hell. General Lee, knowing it would be almost certain death for an officer to go into the charge on horseback, advised all who could possibly walk to go on foot, and his advice was taken by all but 5 of his officers. Having been appointed one of a board by General Longstreet some time before leaving Virginia to appraise all the private horses in his corps, I knew all the 5 horses that were in the charge. The only one I'm going to talk about is General Garnett's. General Garnett had been sick and was strongly advised by the surgeons not to attempt to go into the charge, but disregarding the protest, he put on a common old blue overcoat that completely concealed his uniform, and mounting as his magnificent thoroughbred gelding, Red Eye. He writes, this was the 2nd highest priced horse in the Corps, valued at $1,400. So, I don't know what the price of horses is, but that sounds like a lot of money for a horse. And it probably was one of the more famous horses in this division that they knew it by name. This next part comes from Pickett's Man, a fragment of war history by Walter Harrison. He was the Inspector General of Pickett's division. Take the stuff that I'm reading to you with a grain of salt. He writes very lovely. He's got beautiful sentences. Some of them tend to embellish, though, a little bit. This formation was entirely effected as they're moving out here by about 7 o'clock in the morning and screened from the observation of the enemy by the intervening high ground like you see behind us. The left of General Garnett's brigade overlapped a little the right of Pettigrew's in the line of the battlefront, thus preventing Armistead's brigade from coming up in continuation of the first line. While forming this line, General Armistead asked me to inquire of General Pickett whether he wished to push out and form a line in front of the right of Heath's division, or to hold his position in rear for the present. Not seeing General Pickett immediately, and anxious to satisfy General Armistead, I rode up to General Longstreet, who I saw with General Lee, on top of the ridge in front of us, making a close reconnaissance of the enemy's position, and addressed General Armistead a question to him. The great war horse of the army, or as he was familiarly called, Old Peter, seemed to be in anything but pleasant humor at the prospect over the hill, for he snorted out rather sharply, I thought, General Pickett will attend to that, sir. Then as I was going off, thinking perhaps in his usual kind-heartedness that he had necessarily snubbed a poor sub, he said, never mind, Colonel, you can tell General Armistead to remain where he is for the present, and he can make up the distance when the advance is made. I don't think these 2 divisions along this line, A.P. Hill's 2 divisions up there and Pickett's division overlap. There's a gap. The plan is, if you notice over there with Trimble's and Pettigrew's divisions, they're stacked up brigades behind themselves on the inside of the line. In other words, you have a brigade, 2 brigades here, 2 brigades over there, and then a brigade on the end. The depth is in the middle, and I think Longstreet's plan is for that depth in the middle to strike the middle of the line up there. The day before, on July 2nd, his brigades are very successful over here at the southern end of the field because they're attacking in depth, and I think that's what he plans for the middle of this line going across the field. But I think there's a gap. I'm pretty sure there's a gap between the lines. And if Armistead wanted to bring his brigade up and get to the left of Garnett's, there was plenty of room for that. But that's not the plan. The plan is for Garnett to be behind this brigade, so when they get to the middle of the line, they're hitting that line with some depth behind it. So that's why I said Harrison here is trying. He writes very flourishy, but not everything is close to truthful there. He says, look, even in that morning's light, before a deadly shot had been fired, before a drop of blood had spotted that green meadow, which was so soon to be soaked with bloody carnage, like an open gut appens, not sure what that is, for slaughter, a passage to the valley of death, and the attacking force like a truly forlorn hope on an extensive scale. But General Lee's confidence in his men he had reserved for this desperate work, the well-proved mettle of these veterans of many a hard-won field under his own eye, doubtless had satisfied him, even at that early day, that Pickett's men would and could carry anything they were put against. The day was clear and bright. Nature, at least, was all smiling, as she will smile, spite of the existing or portending woes of mortals. Although her elements had already been well shaken by 2 days of desultory fighting, yet the serenity of this morn betokened little of the fierce conflict of passions and deadly strife between men who should have been brethren in some common cause, as they were children of a common country. This inauspicious calm but preceded the most terrible storm of battle. There is or was on the crest of the slope about 200 yards in front of our line of battle a certain peach orchard. And that is the peach orchard, which is way over there, which has often been mentioned in accounts of the Battle of Gettysburg. And attached to that peach orchard was a house. Undoubtedly, it's the Joseph Sherfy house. It could be the Wentz house over there, but I think it's probably the Sherfy house, with a well of the coldest, hardest water that ever sprung out of a limestone rock. I never shall forget that water, whether it is now celebrated Gettysburg water, which is said to cure every ailment that human flesh and blood and bones and intestines cherish, for the detriment of us poor sinners, I know not. But I shall know if ever I taste that abominable bottled stuff. It was so hard you could hardly drink it by itself, and it would hardly amalgamate with Chambersburg whiskey. I was sitting in this peach orchard with General Garnett and General Wilcox, first trying a piece of cold mutton, which General Wilcox had produced, and trying to drink the hard water, and then accomplishing without much difficulty a little pull at the Chambersburg whiskey, only to prevent the water from freezing my whole internal economy and petrifying my heart of hearts, when this first signal gun broke mysteriously upon the long tedium of the day. Having been previously informed of the signal, I told General Garnett that we had better be getting back to our line, as the work was about to commence in earnest. Let's see.
Who wrote that?
His name is Harrison. He was the adjutant for Pickett's division.
Thank you.
Walter Harrison. I like the way it flows. Just for historical purposes, you gotta, you gotta look at other books before you believe everything this guy writes. This was written by, he was then a private, Samuel Paulet of the 18th Virginia Regiment, Company F. This came from, you find stuff from the weirdest places. History of Prince Edward County, Virginia. It's got a bunch of volumes. In one of the volumes, you have this account from Private Paulet. And he's writing about his experiences here at Gettysburg. He said, I would say between 6 and 8 o'clock we arrived at and took up our position along Seminary Ridge. After the boys had been lined up, they were ordered to lie down. At this time, everything was so quiet, none but those who would participate in this death grapple would have thought there was 100 men within a mile. Yet along those lines there were, of the Yankee Army, 105,000 men. It's a lot. Clearly he can't see them. And of General Lee's Army, 62,000. After taking a general survey and noting the difficult and dangerous path we must travel in order to reach those Yanks, my heart almost failed me and my hair and hat began to rise as I thought, can we win? Then turning to the company, I said, this is going to be a heller. Prepare for the worst. Oh no. This remark created no laugh. The boys had looked and seen for themselves. They knew that many of us had answered our last roll call and no doubt asked themselves, is it me or is it I? But none can tell. Artillery thunder been heard. This continued for about 2 hours. Then came the simple word, attention. The boys sprang to their feet, reeling from the effects of the hot July sun, but soon they became steady, and the line was ready to face the charge, the mighty host of men and guns on Cemetery Heights. At this time, General Pickett rode in front of our brigade, he having been our former commander, and raising himself in the stirrups, he pointed to the heights and he said, boys, you see that battery? I want you to take those guns. Remember, you are Virginians. Forward, the line moved at a quick step. Passing through our line of artillery, we made for the heights. Our line being in full view from the start, the Yanks opened on us with round shot, then shell. Nearing the Emmitsburg Road, Little Round Top on our right, having enfilade fire, opened with shell, which tore great gaps in our line. And this is from Private Randolph Shotwell. This comes from the North Carolina Historical Commission. He was with the 8th Virginia. He wrote, when Pickett galloped back from his visit to Longstreet, the men gathered up their accoutrements and prepared themselves for the command which would launch them forward into the valley of the shadow of death. General Richard S. Garnett of my brigade sat upon his horse at the extreme right of Pickett's line, surrounded by his staff and a number of officers of my regiment. He had arisen from a sick couch to lead his brigade, and now wore an old blue overcoat, closely buttoned up to the chin, notwithstanding the heat of the July afternoon. The same coolness extended to his noble soul, for no one could have imagined that the quiet figure, calmly smoking as he awaited the order which was to be his own death knell, had come. Despite a strong presentiment, soon to be fatally confirmed, that he was going into his last battle. Any further instructions? Asked Garnett. General Pickett wrote up, no, Dick, I believe not, unless it is to advise you to make the very best time in crossing the valley. It is a devilish ugly place over yonder. We can't afford to let them double team on us. At this juncture, upon orders from... I'll wait for that up there. That's a better spot to read that. Finally, we know that in the OR, Pickett's official report is not there. He turned it into Lee. Lee sends it back and says, you need to redo this, because Pickett names other men that he's putting the blame on and why this fails. Other men from other divisions, perhaps. Who knows what's actually in there? And what Lee knows is there's still a war on. He's got to tamp down any internal strife within his own army to fight the Union Army. So he can't afford to have this internal squabbling going on. So he sends the OR, the official report from Pickett, back, and it never gets resubmitted or published. There are 2 of these brigades out here that publish official reports. One is from Garnett's brigade that's in the OR, and the other one is from Kemper's brigade that's not in the OR, but it's in another publication. So this gets filed by Lieutenant Colonel Charles Peyton. He ends up as the brigade commander after this battle takes place because of all the other wounded officers above him. So Lieutenant Colonel Peyton of the 19th Virginia is going to write this official report and turn it in, and he's going to submit it to Major Charles Pickett. That's the assistant attorney, adjutant general of Pickett's division. It's George's brother. He says, Major, in compliance with instructions from division headquarters, I have the honor to report the part taken by this brigade in the late battle near Gettysburg, July 3rd. Notwithstanding the long and severe marches made by the troops of this brigade, they reached the field about 9 o'clock a.m. and were on high spirits and good condition. About 12 midday, we were ordered to take position behind the crest of a hill on which the artillery under Colonel Alexander was planted, where we lay during a most terrific cannonading, which opened about 1:30 o'clock p.m. and was kept up without intermission for 1 hour. During the shelling, we lost about 20 killed and wounded. Among the killed was Lieutenant Colonel Ellis of the 19th Virginia, whose bravery as a soldier and his innocence, purity, and integrity as a Christian had not only elicited the admiration of his own command, but endeared him to all who knew him. About 2:30 p.m., the artillery fire having to some extent abated, the order to advance was given first by Major General Pickett in person and repeated by General Garnett. The brigade moved in good order, keeping up its line almost perfect, notwithstanding it had to climb 3 high post and rail fences, behind the last of which the enemy's skirmishers were first met and immediately driven in. So, I think I'm going to leave it at that, and because the skirmishers they drive in are up here near the road. Any questions? Everybody tired of hearing me read?
So the Garnetts Brigade, basically in this swale right here,
Yep.
along this is what they're looking at right here.
Yeah.
Where the other regiments, I guess, or brigades are behind them.
You've got another brigade back over here. Whether it's in this orchard, and there was an orchard here. If you look at the Lano map, he puts them right here, and he has this orchard. Like I said, the Hessler-Mott's map in their book is a little bit different. All the maps, I'm sure Brad Gottfried's maps are a little different too. But Kemper's back here. Kemper is definitely behind Garnett, or excuse me, Armistead is behind Garnett, and Kemper is on the right. Now further on, I haven't mentioned them, is Wilcox and Lang's brigade. It's Lang then Wilcox. What they're supposed to be doing is guarding the right flank of Pickett's division. But like so much on the Confederate side during this battle, I think the orders are kind of muddled and they're not very clear. Wilcox is put in charge of both brigades, so he has overall command of these two brigades that got used up pretty good on July 2nd, and I don't think he's really sure what to do with them. And by the time they do move forward, it's too late because Pickett's men are coming the other way. You're just moving out now to mitigate the loss of Pickett's men and keep the Union Army from coming further this way. So they're over there also. Okay.
Aren't they pushed back by the Vermonters as well? When
The Vermonters are going to come out, attack Kemper's flank. Kemper's men start to fall back, and then they turn and they come into this other flank. You're right, yeah. That, and they're taking a lot of artillery over there from McGilvery's line and probably Little Round Top. So. Yes, sir.
How much artillery is on Little Round Top to speak of?
There's 6 guns over there. I only think about two, maybe 3 of them can turn and get the angle properly. But still, they got that high spot over there. And you can see this whole line up here from Little Round Top. Can't see these men. So it's not until they start moving out, and it's really, I'm sure Garnett's men take fire from them, but Kemper's the one because they're on the flank. Kemper bores the brunt of McGilvery's line and also those guns a Little Round Top. But they all these soldiers see the guns firing up there. You can't.
Copse of trees among these officers. Are they all focused on that? And can you even see it from down here?
You can't see it from here, but their commanders have ridden out. That's why Pickett's telling Garnett, you got to get across there because he has been out there. There's several accounts of Longstreet, Hill, and Lee riding up and down this line. Maybe come back next year and we'll talk more about it. I'm using myself. Riding this line, they know what's in front of them, but the average private in the ranks doesn't know. And copse is it's not a mine, it's a post-war word. It's the clump. Some people think it's Ziegler's Grove. Then there's the clump of trees. I always say that's the general aiming point in that area. But the trees bring on more significance afterwards. And then, of course, Batchelder puts that high water mark, which I would debate, is that the real high water mark? Come to the CWI tour I'm going to lead this summer. We'll talk about that. Is that the high water mark? They point at those trees. They stick out like a sore thumb over there. But is it the trees or that area? We don't know, but it's that general area. They want to punch a hole in that line. So. And anyway, any other questions?
I got one.
Yes.
So the map shows them pretty much lined up like this.
Yeah.
But they end up over there.
Yeah.
Are they turning to move that way, or are they just kind of walking at an angle? How do they get
are.
over there when they're lined up like this?
And if you remember, it's not quite like this either, I don't think. In the movie, Pickett bends down. He has drawn in the sand, a little sand table with the stick. We're going to oblique to the left, oblique to the left. They move up, and they're moving towards the left, and then they sort of get up to the road, and they kind of shift to the left. But you're right. Again, there's a gap between these two forces on the Confederate side. The operational plan, and they're supposed to be guiding on Burkett Fry's Tennesseans. That's the plan. So a lot of these men say we're the guide. I'm pretty sure it's Fry over here. He took over for Archer. But it's to close that gap, and to do that, Pickett's men have to come to the left, slide to the left. And so the other thing we can't see is the Cudary barn. It's got those 3 spires on the top. That's a pretty big barn. We can't see it. When Garnett's men come up here, they're going to end up being on the left side. Kemper's men are coming at the barn. Maybe one of their regiments comes on the left, but for the most part, I think they're on the right, coming through there. But that house and that barn, that's not the original barn. It is the original house. That's where they're headed. Garnett's men are going to move enough to the left to come on the left side of that barn over there. So, when I'm giving a regular tour, not getting in the weeds, I'll tell people if you draw it on the map, it looks like a big old apostrophe. Now, whether it really looks like an apostrophe, but it gives them the idea they're not facing, like Pettigrew and Trimble's men, they're not facing the objective. The objective is over there. They're clearly facing this lower part of the ridge. They got to go over there. So, any more before we walk? All right. And this alludes to what I spoke of earlier. Park Service, and I don't blame them. You can't have people just wandering around these fields because they use the fields. These are real. There's apples over there. So over there you can see some guns. Those are Wolfeck's battery. Those Parrott guns, not Parrott, Napoleons. There's a path right there, and that path is a nice cut path that they cut. Will take you a pleasant walk across the field. That's where most people are walking, and they say they're walking Pickett's Charge. We are walking Pickett's Charge. They don't know any better. God help them. They should hire a guide. But we are walking the path of Garnett's men today. We're on the road up here. So those are two, and there's probably another one, and we're going to cross through this other one directly in our front, so it could have been those. Well, I think they're probably in front of this fence.
Oh, okay.
If they're here, they're in front of this fence. Yeah, they would have come up the lane because it doesn't hurt to stay in front of the fence. You still can't see in front of you. Right. So they're out there. Cemetery Ridge. Now they're coming up here. As we're faced, they're probably going straight through that fence. We're going a little bit more to the left, right towards the Blue Water Tower, because that's where the gap is, and they don't want me knocking down fences. I would change my name to something other than Jim Hester, because I wouldn't want to get him in trouble for that. But they're going this way, through this fence. And like I said, they're coming on the left side of the Kadori barn. Kemper's men are headed towards the Kadori farm. The majority of his brigade will be on the right-hand side. So as they come up here, once we got through that fence, we're on the rise. We could be seen by the artillery over McGilvery's line. We can definitely now be seen by Little Round Top over here to our right. And so, like I said, Kemper's brigade, when they move up, they're going to start taking the brunt of all that artillery fire on their right flank. But it's not until you get up here and come through this fence that you can finally see where you're going to. So. All right, now if you look to the front, other than over here to the right, if you look straight to the front, this is where Garnett's going. They've lost sight of the road again. If you lost sight of the road, you've lost sight of the ridge beyond. So they're now down in one of these swales again. This affords them protection. They can probably regroup a little bit here. The problem is they got to keep going that way. Kemper's brigade is over to the right. You can clearly see Little Round Top now. And so those guns can fire over into this area. It's wide open over here because everything's turning. And then you can see cars lined up over here on Hancock Avenue across the way, on Cemetery Ridge. McGilvery's gun line is over there, and you have some Vermonters further up the road that are going to come out. They're going to come out and dig into Kemper's flank mainly because Garnett's over here on this side. So they are going to swing out over in this area. Now we're in view of all that over there, but for our purpose with Garnett's brigade, looking to our front, again, you can't see the road and you can't see the ridge again. We can't even see the water tower anymore, and that's a pretty big, like I said, largest regimental monument on the field. That's pretty high, but we can't see it. That shows you how low in this low ground we've come to. This is back to, let's see, Sergeant Shotwell with the 8th. He writes, at this juncture, upon orders from the Brigadier General Garnett, my company was deployed as skirmishers, sent forward to drive in the federal sharpshooters who were swarming in the valley like locusts in Egypt, and to pull down a number of stake and rider fences which obstructed the path of the division between the lines. It was not pleasant duty, and while we were engaged in tearing down the fencing, the Yankee sharpshooters safely ensconced in the sunken road behind the brick house. That brick house is the Kadori house. Plied us with their leaden compliments with ceaseless activity. However, I directed the rails to be thrown into piles which when our work was done formed a temporary breastwork behind which we lay until the column appreciated. So when Garnetts men are coming out, they're preceded by some skirmishers. There's Union skirmishers down here by the road. And that's who he's talking about. They're going to push those skirmishers back. A number of them are behind the Kadori house over here. If you go down, just for context, that big old tree right there where the monument is, that's where the Rogers farm was, the Rogers house. Of course, the house is not there, but there was another house there. But when they talk about this red brick house, it's got to be the Kadori house because it's the only one in this neighborhood of their line of march. This is back to the official report of Lieutenant Colonel Payton. He said the brigade moved in good order, keeping up its line almost perfect, notwithstanding it had to climb 3 high post and rail fences, behind the last of which the enemy's skirmishers were first met and immediately driven in. Moving on, we soon met the advanced line of the enemy lying concealed in the grass on the slope about 100 yards in front of his second line, which consisted of a stone wall about breast high, running nearly parallel to and about 30 paces from the crest of the hill, which was lined with their artillery. That, of course, is the stone fence where the angle is today. So he's pushing these skirmishers back. That leads me to believe the third fence they climb over, probably the second fence along the Emmitsburg Road. There's probably another fence in the Kadori farm, but if they're coming on this side, the left side of that fence, they're not having to scale it. I'm pretty sure they're talking about the one in the road that they're having to go over. He writes, the first line, referred to above after offering some resistance, was completely routed and driven in confusion back to the stone wall. Here we captured some prisoners, which were ordered to the rear without guard. Having routed the enemy there, General Garnett ordered the brigade forward, which was promptly obeyed, loading and firing as they advanced. We don't think about the Confederates taking prisoners as they're doing this, but they do. If you get to the angle, this is trivia, it's not important, but where the angle is, the fence goes north, then goes east, where that lone tree is, to some flat rocks. Those rocks are called the Stockwell rocks because they put some Union prisoners. The Confederates told these prisoners to sit there on these rocks. One of them was a sergeant major named Stockwell, so he gets a rock named after him. So, you know, I don't know how long he sat there. If I'm him, I'm getting up and running away because the Confederates got their hands full, but that's why it's called the Stockwell rock. They're putting POWs there. All right. We'll continue on, but as we do so, again, look around you and see what you can see or cannot see. They had lain in comparative security. For an instant, the sheen of the bright muskets contrasted with the red clay of the works, and then all was hidden by the fearful, withering, blinding blaze that burst forth from the myriad muzzles, as if the hill had suddenly become a volcano, exploding deadly gases and vomiting fire and destruction upon the valley below. The meager and isolated nature of our assault had left the enemy free to pack a brigade after brigade into the works on Cemetery Hill, so that it is not out of bounds to say that 20,000 muskets were emptied into Pickett's column before a shot was fired in return. I think that's an exaggeration, but whatever. General Garnett fell not far from the brick house and soon expired. General Kemper had been carried off with a shattered leg. Major Pickett also lost a leg, and the general was slightly wounded, though he was able to ride off the field. General Pickett is not wounded. Those of us who survived this rushed forward. The flag of the 8th Virginia fell 4 times in as many minutes, carrying down a life each time. New men picked it up and carried it at a full run. Armistead's brigade had started as our support, now came up to the front line. In a few hundred yards of the mingled mob, all regiments clambered over the ditch in front of the works. He says he thinks about 20,000 muskets are up there behind the wall. It's around 6,000 infantry that are at the wall initially. Once everything gets up to the wall and the fighting begins, those Union commanders are pulling troops from wherever they can grab them to bring them into that area. They probably bring in anywhere from about 10 to 15,000 more troops there. But when they first get to the wall, it's only about 6,000. But you're going up the slope, which we'll see. You do go uphill when you cross the road. And these men are afforded protection behind a wall. The wall's probably about 2 feet high at the time. Not that high, but high enough if you're trying to shoot somebody on the other side of it. Real quick.
In the account you just read, it talked about red clay.
Yeah.
What do you think about that? Is that accurate?
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe it was tilled up some, or Union soldiers are trying to dig to get lower into the ground. Maybe they see that. Or he's just using flourish, language like the other fellow was doing, talking about the heavens, looking down on us. So I don't know. They're growing crops over there. I don't think you can grow very many crops in red clay. So it's probably just hyperbole, and he's trying to make it sound as dramatic as possible, which they like to do. And you know what? If I survive this charge, I'd make stuff sound more dramatic than it actually is too. So, I was trying to find another account. Pistol and musket, it seemed that heaven and earth had come together with a mighty crash. The earth trembled, men fell to rise no more, and in a few minutes the pride of Virginia manhood had burned their last powder. Here I was captured with others of my company and carried to the rear of the Yankee Army, so for the present my connection with the Army in Northern Virginia had ceased. A few days ago, Bob Miller met me on the street and asked if I remember what passed between us on the field just after being captured. I told him no. He said he came up to me while we were under the fire of our guns and in shelling the heights and asked me what had become of the boys, and I replied, "Hootsy, damned if I know." This to show how utterly unconscious of fear boys became in war. All right, this is from the official report. There was scarcely not an officer or man in the command whose attention was not attracted by the cool and handsome bearing of General Garnett, who, totally devoid of excitement or rashness, rode immediately in rear of his advancing line, endeavoring by his personal efforts and by the aid of his staff to keep his line well closed and dressed. He was shot from his horse while near the center of the brigade within 25 paces of the stone wall. This gallant officer was too well known to need further mention. So now it's a little bit further from the house over here, but there's more accounts. More accounts say he was shot somewhere over near the house than up here, so I tend to go with that area. Either way, the guy got shot. The conduct of Captain Shepard of the 28th Virginia was particularly conspicuous. His son fell. His son fell, mortally wounded at his side. He stopped but a moment to look at his dying son, gave him his canteen of water, and pressed on with his company to the wall, which he climbed and fought the enemy with his sword in their own trenches until his sword was wrenched from his hands by two Yankees. He finally made his escape to safety. I can't imagine being up here next to your son and your son gets killed and you got to go on. I can't imagine what it's like to have a son. I got 5 daughters and 4 granddaughters, but still, you get my point. That has to be, I just can't imagine how you go on.
And then he had to leave him here.
He left him here.
As he was going back.
Yeah. So, I think adrenaline gets you back, but once everything stops, that's when the thinking starts, and that's when your problems start, and you got to relive this. And then you got to write home to his wife and the boy's mom and say, we lost our kid up here. I just can't imagine what that's like.
What officer was that?
Captain Shepard, 28th Virginia. Did that one? Let's see. Here's a short little historical sketch, Company G of, let's see, The Nottoway Grays, 18th Virginia Regiment, by Richard Irby. He was the chaplain of Company G. He wrote, as adjutant, I was in the situation to know and can testify to the admirable conduct of the entire regiment, how they closed up when large gaps were made in the ranks, how orderly they moved forward, driving the enemy, and how the few scattered ones that remained unhurt held their ground, hoping, but in vain, for support, until they were killed or captured by the fresh troops of Federals that were pushed forward to support their comrades and restore their broken lines. Sergeant Major J.C. Gill, formerly of Company G, fell at my side, wounded in the loins. While I was endeavoring to aid him, J.C. Webb, also of Company G, was wounded just below the eye. Both of whom died. There was a momentary cessation of firing. Our scattered men were trying to save themselves from capture by a hasty retreat. I remember to have seen Charles Atkinson, who was wounded, and Ovid Williams, who it is supposed was killed running back. Seeing the next instant that fresh troops in our front, who opened immediately upon our retreating men, and knowing it would be certain death to attempt escape across the open field, I'd laid down and commenced firing, and continued until I saw it was useless, and the wounded around me begged me to quit. I was only endangering their lives. I then endeavored to pass off as a wounded man, hoping to escape by night, or that our reserves would deliver us, but soon the enemy advanced their line, and about sunset came around, getting up all the wounded ones who could walk. I shall ever remember the heart-rending scene of our brave comrades lying wounded upon the ground and beseeching our Colonel Carrington and myself, who were carried from the field together, please bring me some water. And finally, before we go a little bit further, this comes from, again, Confederate veteran in 1915. Brigadier General Richard Garnett. It's from R.H. Irvine. As an eyewitness to the death of General Garnett, I am able to give the attending circumstances and the reason why his body was not identified and why his friends never knew what became of it. I joined a volunteer company in that county, Amherst County in Virginia, which became Company I of the 19th Virginia Infantry Regiment. I continued with my company and regiment until June of 1863, when the Army of Northern Virginia began its march into Pennsylvania. I was then detailed as a courier for General Garnett. The artillery duel began about 1:30, lasted an hour and a half. During this artillery fire, men lay down on the ground flat on their faces under broiling hot sun. Many were killed and wounded by shell and shot. General Garnett rode close behind the line of battle, and as it met the fire of the enemy and men fell, killed or wounded, he continually called, "Steady, men, close up, a little faster, not too fast, save your strength." When within close musket range, the Federal infantry delivered a tremendous volley, which struck down a very large number of the men and killed, wounded, and unhorsed the whole of the staff and couriers except General Garnett and myself, but wounding our horses. Then the men in their headlong rush had reached the stone fence behind which the Federal infantry was posted and were driving and pushing them back, when I was ordered by General Garnett to rush to the rear and hurry up Armistead's men. Returning quickly to this mission, I was again at the general's side, the struggle still close and bloody. Discovering that the troops on the left of this brigade were giving way and the enemy flanking his brigade, the general ordered me to go to the left. He went to the right to tell the officers to fall back. I was quickly back at his side, finding him within 15 or 20 paces of the rock wall and a little to the right of the point of the angle known as the Bloody Angle as we faced the enemy. Just as the general turned his horse's head slightly to the left, he was struck in the head by a rifle or musket ball and fell dead from his horse. And almost at the same moment, cannon shot from the Federal infantry, when I read too much, I just can't read. Cannon shot from a Federal battery on the right struck my horse immediately behind the saddle, killing him and throwing his body over the general's body and me upon the ground. So he's saying Garnett's already down, and this fella's horse falls on Garnett. Immediately springing to my feet, I dragged the body from from between my horse's fore and hind feet, took the general's watch from his pocket, gave it to Adjutant General Lithicum, and just then came up wounded, who had just came up wounded and said to me, "We had better get away quickly or we will be killed or captured." We ran away as rapidly as we could, but were halted as we went in aiding a wounded comrade, a former schoolmate of mine, to a ditch or depression in the ground where there was shelter. I hurried to the rear for a litter to remove General Garnett's body, but when I returned with the litter, I found that the enemy had the ground and I could not reach the body. Since the war, I met an ex-federal soldier, Smith by name, who said he was a sharpshooter on the day of this battle and had shot General Garnett, and that as soon as the Confederates retreated from the ground, he went to the body and with his knife ripped from the general's collar his insignia of rank and took his sword. Insomuch as General Meade refused us permission to remove that as all evidence of his rank had been removed, General Garnett was unknown to the Federal burial squads, and that his body was undoubtedly buried near the spot where he fell in the common grave of dead Confederates who lay around him. Captain Lithicum, Adjutant General of this brigade, was afterwards killed at Cold Harbor, 1864. So that's this fellow's explanation of why Garnett was not identified. His body was never discovered. Buried undoubtedly up here with a bunch of unknown Confederate soldiers. And his body undoubtedly probably laid in this field till 1871 when ex-Confederates, Confederate women's groups raised money for men to come up here and exhume these bodies and take them south. General Pickett, like I mentioned at the beginning, dies in 1875. He's buried in Hollywood Cemetery. If you haven't been down there, he's got a nice, sits right next to a road. It's within the cemetery, but a nice tomb over his burial site. If you're facing that and facing the road behind it, to the right is a big plot of the Gettysburg Unknown, and they call these Pickett's men. Garnett's probably buried in that area, and there is a monument there to Garnett. Nobody knows which site it is that Garnett's buried there, but he's probably buried over there with all these other men with their former commander who died in 1875. These men were put in the grave before, Pickett arrived down there. That's 1871, 1872. Pickett dies in 1875. Now back to this fellow Smith, this federal sharpshooter. Everybody's a sharpshooter when a general goes down, and they claim afterwards, I was the one that shot him because I'm a sharpshooter. Yeah, right. It doesn't matter, the person's dead. But he has his sword. 100 years later, he tries to pawn the sword in Baltimore, and that's how we find the sword. The sword, Garnett's sword, showed up at a Baltimore pawn shop. Question? Everybody get that?
What happened to the watch, Leo?
I said Smith came back 100 years later to pawn his sword. Flew over y'all's head. Trying to hear me talk.
What happened to the watch when you said that comrade took it?
Yeah, I don't know. The sword is always the big thing because it showed up in a pawn shop in Baltimore 10 years ago or something. It was a big deal.
Did it have a name on it?
That I don't know.
And where is it now?
That I don't know.
The family has it. I read where the family.
Probably, yeah. I was going to say that or the Civil War Museum down in Richmond, something like that. Because that used to be the Museum of the Confederacy, so that'd be a logical place to go.
Stewart finds it. Confederate General Stewart finds it in the pawn shop, and then eventually it gets back to Armistead's family.
That might be. I thought Stewart died in 1864.
No, the other Stewart.
Oh, George.
George.
Oh, I don't know. I just heard a pawn shop, and I thought it was relatively modern day. I have to look into that.
What is the significance of this ground right there? What is it called? Something?
No, it's just a high piece of ground.
Okay.
And so it plays a part on July 2nd when Ambrose Wright Brigade comes through here.
Okay.
But if you come from that direction, you're over here, you're behind high ground again, and it's the same issue when we were coming across the ground. You can't see everything around you. So it's just, it doesn't have a name, it's just part of this field out here, and it just happens to be high. There are some rocks over here too, so it's not exactly smooth ground either. So, all right, it's noon. Not that I'm trying to rush. I was going to walk further. This has been a very Confederate oriented tour, like last month's was all about Robinson's division. I hardly mentioned the Confederates. There's a point to that. But let me read a couple things from the Union side and I'll wrap up. Real quick, I'll skip this. This is a letter from Lieutenant Anthony McDermott. He is part of the 69th Pennsylvania. It's the little obelisk there. It's kind of hard to see because of the trees, but it's the monument there that's got the smaller stones, 5 to the right, 5 to the left of the chain. They represent the various companies, the 10 companies within that regiment. It's the only regimental monument on the field that has markers for each company. And then the chain, the significance of the chain is those companies bent back, but they did not break. Just like you can move that chain back a little, theoretically you could break the chain if you wanted to and get in trouble, but that's the significance of that. They bent, they did not break. McDermott's going to write to John Batchelder in 1886. He writes, after getting to our feet, our colonel, Dennis O'Kane, gave us orders not to fire a shot until the enemy came so close that we could distinguish the white of their eyes. He also reminded us that we were upon the soil of our own state and that the enemy would probably make a desperate assault upon us. But as he knew, we were at least as brave as they were. He did not fear, but that we would render an account of ourselves this day, that would bring upon the plaudits of our country, and that should any man amongst us flinch in our duty, he would ask that the man nearest him would kill him on the spot. Among our losses was Colonel O'Kane, who fell like a soldier in a great glee, because his men could not be driven from their position. He was not an educated man, and he was gruff in his speech, but with all he had a heart as tender as a woman's, and above all things, he despised a coward. They say he's not an uneducated man. We talk about lawyers and engineers and out there. O'Kane was a bartender before the war, so that's what he did. That's why he's kind of gruff. I'm not going to read this, but I want to point this out. Pete Carmichael. This is what happened. I don't talk this much in a day. I don't talk this much in 3 days during the week. Pete Carmichael shared this with me. It's something we had 2 years ago in our walk across this field, so I want to acknowledge that. I'm not going to be able to read it today. But it's the letters of Henry Owen. He's from the 18th Virginia. And then finally, a lot of people, especially when you stand over there at the North Carolina Monument, when you stand at that monument, you can see across this open ground up to the ridge. So that ground is flatter over there, and you can see it's open field. People a lot of times say, how in the world do they march across this open field? What are they thinking? Well, this is again from Sergeant Shotwell, the 8th Virginia. At the end of his writing, he says, it is easy to say now that this was an impractical undertaking, that the federal position and forces were too strong and the attacking column altogether too weak for any such task. It is easy now to suggest a score of things that might have been done or left undone. These ex post facto proofs of wisdom are the special province of a certain class of military and historical critics who are nothing if not critical. Those who participated in the ill-fated charge saw nothing of the rashness, blind folly, or uselessness of the attempt, but on the contrary, were in splendid spirits and confident of sweeping everything before them. I refer now to the rank and file, of whom my recollection is that never was there anything like the same enthusiasm in entering battle. And that's how they came across here. We look back on it now because we know what happened, and it looks like it's folly. But those men, this is what they've been doing for 2 years now. They've been coming across some open fields. In military, it's the same today. Technology outpaces tactics. Technology had changed enough to render these type tactics folly, but they hadn't learned the lesson enough yet. After this, they would, because things changed in 1864. But at the time, they have confidence in themselves. They have confidence in their leaders, Pickett, Longstreet, and Lee, to think there's no reason that they can't come through here and sweep the Federals off of those ridges up there. Federals have something to say about that, of course, and they are fighting on their land, and that makes it different. Any final questions?
Well, Lewis, I have a question. When you talk about the flatness of from the North Carolina Monument up to here, Was there an actual ultimate knowledge of the undulating fields over here, similar to back up at Robinson's the last time when you really couldn't see what was going on?
I think there had to be because of the July 2nd action, but it's not Pickett's men that are taking part in that. So it's a matter of those commanders that take part communicating that. Like when Wright is standing in the peach orchard with Alexander, Wright was up here the day before. He famously tells Alexander up there because the whole infernal Yankee army's up there. So he knows it, but the rank and file have no idea.
It wasn't necessarily to their advantage, it's just what was here, or did they tend to use it as
They do
tactical?
use it. It helps them come across the field faster. But it's just happenstance. That's the way the land is down there compared to up here. Now this land has been changed also. We had Captain Eisenhower out here running a little tank across there.
Yeah.
How much has changed though, I don't know. Either way, without that changes, I still think it's fairly flat like it is.
Right.
So, like I said, it's the people that make these tours. I thank you from my heart.
Thank you, Louis.
Thank you everybody for coming out. It's good to see all the familiar faces every time we do this. Great to see the new faces. We hope to join us next year in April for our 4th or 5th season, something like that, 4th or 5th season. Those of you coming to the Farnsworth House, we'll see you over there. If you didn't get in the count and you decided you do want to come because you're starving, just go. We'll see you there as well. And, Christmas party. It's free. It's at Saberhood. If you've never been to Saberhood, this is your opportunity to go. We're going to have the whole back room to ourselves. There's going to be a bar there, our own bar, so you don't have to worry about all the other people. And it's free. You go sign up on either the website under events. I shared it on Facebook, and also I shared it on Patreon. So I hope to see you all there. Thank you very much for coming. And don't forget, if you liked your ride, please tip your guide.
I signed up last night. I'll be there.
Thanks, guys. December 9th. Oh, it's December 9th if you want to go.
Thank you, buddy.
He's going
on.